engagement there.
You're listening to Head South Radio with your host, Kat Meyer, a podcast dedicated to prioritizing pleasure and removing the stigma and shame around sex. We're here to be curious and have an open conversation about sexual health and relational wellness. This podcast is intended for educational and entertainment purposes. The information discussed is not a substitute for professional medical advice.
And start to settle into your seat and feel for your sit bones rooting down into your chair. Feeling your feet, feeling your seat. And then from that rooted feeling down, start to grow tall through the crown of your head, feeling the suspended experience of your rib cage floating over your pelvic bowl. Finding integrity with your spine so that your shoulder blades can start to drop away from the ears, lengthening your neck, finding space in your neck, space across your chest. And then just start to observe and witness your breath. Set a little intention for this conversation for the next hour. And then when you're ready, start to blink your eyes open, taking in the light, taking in the screen. Hello.
Hello.
Dr. Jeannelle, thank you so much for joining me on Head South Radio. I wanted to just give a little intro of how we met, which was through the Vibe Expo that happened in Los Angeles in January. And I had met a few of the people who were supporting you as they were walking the floor. And I was very excited to talk to you. So I ran over to your booth and came over and chatted to you a little bit. And you had written a book called Intimacy.
That's right.
I've been reading it, so I haven't finished it. I just wanted to let everyone know I haven't finished it, but I'm really, really enjoying it. And so I would love for you to give us an idea of who you are, what you do, and then we'll chat about the book and the work that you're doing with your clients, with your patients.
So everyone calls me Dr. Jeannelle, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm a psychotherapist, and I spend a considerable amount of time also being a clinical supervisor for those who are truly looking to be more culturally competent in their practice. And the clientele that I have now is predominantly African American. I see probably about 20% men, and then almost half and half, 50% couples and individuals. And what I love about what I do is that I look at the systemic nature of how we came to be from childhood, sometimes in utero, depending on what's happening, to today, and then help my clients look at that history and make a decision about how they want to live, how they want to think, how they want to feel, so that they can manifest what they want for the future, make change with what's happening in the present. And I think that's so important to do in that mental and emotional health space, because it truly impacts our physical health as well and every relationship we have.
No, I love that. In reading your book, I love your voice in it as well. I've read quite a few relationship, self-help, psychology, trauma, yoga books, all of these different types of books in these different modalities. But it's really nice to hear your voice. You share a lot of stories of couples you've worked with, and it's very relatable. Because I remember when we were talking at the Vibe Expo, you had mentioned like the audience that you're speaking to in the book is Black African American people, but it's also it's a human, human information.
Absolutely.
And so I appreciated that there is this cultural context where race and intersectionality of race and couples and what they're dealing with and how they can, what you mentioned, like unravel some of the systems that have informed them to their beliefs. And so I would love for you, if you could, the first question I have is, what is sexual intimacy?
Yeah. So intimacy, I look at from a broad perspective. So it's the cognitive, the emotional, and the spiritual that really brings us to the space where sexual intimacy truly gives us a deeper connection. The truth of the matter is that we could have sex the mechanics, the physicality. We could do that with anyone. But when you have this incredible opportunity to delve into who that individual truly is, when you have that sexual, physical connection, it really brings out the truth of the pleasure in that experience rather than just the performance. And
Mhm.
so sexual intimacy is, for the context of what we're talking about, taking the time to know the individual so that you can fully be engulfed in the pleasure of one another.
Thank you. I love that. The definition. I think what I'm visualizing or seeing is like if there's sexual intimacy between two people at the center of this, and it's two individuals engaging, what your book
Mhm,
is talking about is like all the other layers that wrap each of those individuals, how they identify, how they express who they are as people, and then who they are as a couple, but then also how are they relating in their family dynamics? How are they relating
mhm,
socially? So it kind of expands out. And what I love about your book is that you're breaking down from the most outer and most influential sometimes parts of
mhm,
us, and then
mhm.
going into community, going into, I love that you also bring up spirituality and religion and how that informs. That is one of the places that people get their information of how intimacy should work, marriage should work.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because oftentimes we leave it in the background because we
Hmm.
think, God or whatever the being is that we see as being that higher spiritual connection is not really involved in our physical, natural, everyday lives. And I
Hmm.
believe it's just the opposite, that it's the spiritual that informs who we are in the natural context. So, yes, it's about delving deeper into who is this individual I've chosen to spend my time with, whether it's even, a romantic relationship or your best friends and girlfriends or your parents. You have to get to know who they truly are before you can delve into an intimate relationship with them. Not always the physical side, but
Yep.
intimacy is about looking beyond the physicality and the stereotypical components and digging into that cognitive, emotional, spiritual space before you can even begin. You can't even give someone a hug if you don't really know them well. They don't want you
Right.
touching them, right?
Yeah.
So it really takes time to build true intimacy.
And then that leads to my next question of how does an individual, I think it's important for an individual to have intimacy with themselves as well. Like,
Hmm.
how do you understand yourself to then connect with other beings? And so, what is
Yeah.
your advice for people? Because it is this kind of unraveling, like the work you're doing is helping people unravel to find themselves, to then share themselves.
Hmm.
What is the work that someone would have to do to have an intimate relationship with themselves?
Yeah. Self awareness is something that also evades us, right? So
Hmm.
we are so busy that this means that if we want to be self aware, if we want to have self love, we have to take the time to stop long enough to truly ask ourselves, what do I want? What do I need? How do I feel? Is this benefiting me? Is this a negative or a positive in my space? And that means stopping to really assess rather than responding out of the emotional space. And
Yeah.
oftentimes, I mean, we're only born with six emotions. Six. And this is the
What?
thing that people, yes,
Wait, what?
we are born with six emotions.
Hmm.
And it's surprise, disgust, happiness, sadness, anger, and fear. That's all we're born with. We have to have someone teach us the other 7,000 plus.
Hmm.
Think about that for a moment,
Wow.
7,000 plus emotions, and then they get cultivated through lived experience.
Hmm.
And if you don't have a connection to someone who already knows and understands the additional emotional spaces, then you're operating out of that six for the majority of your life. And
Hmm.
that's why we don't always know what we need. We don't always know what we want. We don't know what we like, what brings us joy. We don't know the difference between happiness and joy. We don't know the difference between anger and disappointment. And
Mhm.
when you know those things personally, you respond differently to the world around you.
I think in your book there you have a great chart that like lines out like it takes up probably a full page, might be 2
It
pages, I
does.
can't remember, and it fills
Mhm.
out all of the different emotions, and it reminds me of also I'm sure you've seen and are aware of like the circle of emotions,
Mhm.
right? And I remember
Mhm.
being in kindergarten and they had like 6 emotions, like a few, like I'm sad, I'm happy, smiley face
Mhm.
is more like faces. And then
Mhm.
to I think I discovered that wheel of emotions through Instagram at some point in the past 10 years and
Mhm.
was like, whoa, actually, this is, I have it saved on my phone, the wheel of emotions.
Yeah.
And to your point, it's like we will automatically go to those anger, surprise,
Mhm.
the ones that we were born with, and that could be, but then how we express it can become explosive because we're not giving
Mhm.
ourselves the opportunity to sit with it on a daily, like check in with ourselves. And so then it builds up and builds up when you're not checking in. And then it feels explosive or it feels like
Mhm.
the bigger, more robust
Mhm.
expression of emotion. And oftentimes that is taken out on a partner or an intimate
Right.
relationship, a child, a
Right.
parent, who you share a home with. Often those are the people that are on the receiving end of that.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting because when I have either employers who tell me that they have, employees that have bad attitudes or parents whose children are, or even children who say their parents have a bad attitude, right?
Hmm.
I'm keen to help them reframe that because attitude is neither good or bad. What we're really looking at is a sense of emotion. Do they feel helpless, hopeless, powerless, abandoned? What is that feeling? Forgotten, which we don't think of as being a feeling, right? You've
Hmm.
forgotten me. What does that feel like? And a lot of the time, it's difficult for anyone to be able to express those if they've never seen anybody or heard anyone talk about what that looks like, what that feels like. So what do? Anger, you stonewall, won't talk to anybody, you're
Hmm.
contemptuous, and you do little jabs where you're poking one another and bringing up the past in order to make yourself feel better about how terrible someone else is. When in all actuality, what's happening is you're feeling hopeless or
Hmm.
helpless about the situation.
Yeah. When you were speaking, I had like goosebumps when you said about like pulling stuff from the past, like just trying seeking validation, which is
Hmm.
the intimacy that we're speaking about, is like really
Hmm.
witnessing someone. And it is amazing that people, when you're little or even as you grow older in the interactions that you have, sometimes people don't just pause to say, well, how did that feel for you? When you are upset, there is this, oh, it's fine, you're fine, it's going to be okay. There's the fixing from the other
Hmm.
person that then creates,
Hmm.
well, when this shows up in a different way, or if the sensations feel the same, I need to react this way, or I'm expecting my partner to fix it because when I was little, my mommy and daddy fixed it, or
Hmm.
they didn't fix it and I still feel scared like that. No one, I can't depend on anybody.
Right.
The pattern feelings start to
Or
create the
even when you
behavior.
fall, if you fall and hurt yourself and someone says, oh, you're fine, you're okay, but you aren't. You
Hmm.
really are in pain. You are feeling a sense of, I need someone to care for me. And
Hmm.
they just go, you'll be okay. Wipe it off, dust it up.
Yep.
And now you learn that there's nothing you can do if you truly are in pain. There's no one who's going to come to your rescue or help. So you might as well just sit.
Hmm. Sit and either hold resentment, hold it in. It's interesting too, and I'm sure you've experienced this with your patients and even in yourself of like the little thing. It's like a weird straw, the straw that broke the camel's back that is what explodes, and then your partner doesn't even know. And that's where like having to pull all of the other stuff up. But it's like it's this kind of holding it in, clenching to it because no
Right.
one no one has witnessed you. No one has allowed you to express the full feeling. Like, yes, you're feeling pain, but with that pain comes, fear, anxieties, all of that
Yeah.
other stuff that you don't get to put out and move through you, essentially,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
experience that. I wanted to ask about how, with the religion, because you mentioned religion and
Mhm.
spiritual,
Mhm.
I also think that because there is this removed, like we're not putting our sensuality, our sexuality in the position of spirit, like a connection to our spirit and our soul and our
Hmm.
being, there's also this overarching, like, religion creates shame. So that's, I think, where some of that disconnect is. Can you speak a little bit to that, of the shame?
For sure. Hmm. So the shame component of it is really about how you have been taught that your sexuality should even be connected to spiritual things, religious things, however that looks in your life. And so if you are feeling that every time you have an urge or a sensation, that that's bad because it's not with the appropriate person, that has been demonstrated in whatever text, whether it's the Bible, the Quran, or what have you, then what begins to happen is you shy away from and hide who you truly are. And that means that your partner doesn't get an opportunity to see the fullness of you. You don't even get the opportunity to experience the fullness of who you are. And if you do explore and expose yourself and they aren't receptive, then there's the guilt behind the stigma that has
Mhm.
been given. And oftentimes, the only way to work through that is first to try to have the conversation. But if the other person isn't open, then you're going to have to seek therapy, help outside of that space. Because there's nothing worse than walking through life being inauthentic to who you are sexually.
Mhm. That's really good. Thank you. I just took a moment to, like, appreciate that statement, because it
Hmm.
is, a lot of us are walking around with stigma and shame and inauthenticity and not fully expressed. And I think one of the biggest areas where that is withheld is our sexuality, our sensuality,
Hmm.
our ability to allow ourselves to experience pleasure. Because in the same vein of, like, what we were talking about earlier, of, like, when you're in pain and not being able to express that, on the opposite end of the spectrum is pleasure. And we also don't know how to express that. So how do you help people, especially for men, they don't know how to express pleasure in that way, outside of, like,
Hmm.
the idea that sex is the physical and just
Right,
getting the sexual act done versus having a
right.
sexual, sensual experience with one's partner. So how do you work with more of your male clientele through that process of discovering what brings them pleasure?
Yeah, I literally ask them sometimes to get before the mirror, strip down. Obviously not in my office, but to get in front of a mirror and to strip down and to utilize different textures on themselves. Do you like the pleasure of leather on your skin? What does that feel like for you? Actually write out what words come to mind when you feel that. Metal on your skin, what does that feel like for you? Your own fingertips, the roughness of your hands, maybe even, what does that feel like for you? And then make the attempt to not get aroused in the middle
Mm.
of it.
Mhm.
What would happen if you just enjoyed the feeling without getting aroused? I didn't say desire, right? Because you could have the desire and not necessarily get aroused. Oftentimes they come back and say it was difficult to do. So you practice
Mhm.
what that's like for you. Because if you don't know what pleasure feels like for you, you're not likely to ask anyone else what it's like for them or what they need or what they
Mhm.
want. So you have to stop again and do that self awareness.
Mhm. It's also like, you can't expect your partner, the person that you're engaging with, to mind read and know what feels good for you, especially when you don't know what feels good for you,
Hmm.
what kind of
Hmm.
touch. And I think a lot of people don't even know that. And they're going through the motions because of something they've seen, especially
Hmm.
now in this day and age. It's media based porn, witnessing these things and thinking that's what I should be doing. Those are the sounds I should be making. It's amazing to me of how many people don't recognize the sensory experience. So touch, taste. What taste do you like? What do you like about how your partner tastes? How their
Or
skin feels?
smells,
The smells,
right?
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. And I think it's really important also to recognize that for most men, the only time they've been told that there should be pleasure is when they have an orgasm.
Yes, yeah. The end result, the end
The
game.
end result.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so helping them understand that there is pleasure throughout. the day as you're talking to one another, because there's no better way to get a woman aroused than to have a great intellectual conversation with her.
Mhm.
And so, even if it means you have to make note of the things that she loves to talk about, and throughout the course of the week, bring them up.
Mhm.
Those are the kinds of things that take practice. You have to work at that. And it's not that it's hard, it's simply that it hasn't been done before.
Yeah. Yeah, pleasure is practice and they think it's automatic. So then how do you work with couples? I think this is also a big thing and you can correct me, but couples who then just get to the point of like, we're not having sex, we're not even intimate, we're just living in shared space for XYZ reasons, and they're not
Mhm.
actually enjoying each other.
Yeah.
How do you help bring them back together, rediscover one another, rediscover themselves or discover themselves for the first time, and then also rediscover themselves as a couple? So when over time intimacy has diminished or the sex was okay at the beginning, but now it's non-existent, how do you help
Mhm.
navigate that?
But what I'm about to say, I think works even if it's a medical challenge, right?
Mhm, mhm,
Because we think of sex as really being intercourse most of the time and not the non sexual touch things turning into a pleasurable experience,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
So I talk about in the book the five love languages, and I also say I know that sometimes this can be controversial. I get it. However, I think that there's some benefit to a game that I write about in the book, which is once you determine what your love language is, actually writing out the things that bring you pleasure on just a little tab, placing those in that paper sack, if you will, and then trading them. And then throughout the course of time, every week, preferably, you're pulling something from the bag that your partner would like to do or experience. Because usually, when we get to the place where there's a sexless marriage, it really is because we haven't done things together.
Mhm,
We're
mhm,
busy running behind the kids, cleaning up the house. You may have parents who are not doing well physically or medically or emotionally, even. Generally speaking, it's the job and how often you got to get to work. And if you take the time to pull that one little tab that says an hour-long walk in the park, I just want to hold your hand and walk down the path. Might not even require conversation. Now we're building connection again. Makes and that's just a simple, put the tabs in the bag, trade them off. And then I think that one of the biggest pieces of that is because you are in a rut, not necessarily looking for someone to do it perfectly, but to make the attempt,
yes.
the
Mhm,
effort, and
mhm.
appreciating the effort.
Right, and not like scoring how well they did with that.
Hmm.
Can I ask why there's a disclaimer of controversy around, is it the activity or is it the love languages?
It's the five love languages themselves.
Mhm.
So, what we thought was true was that there was a host of research that was done in an effort to determine what the love languages are. And in all actuality, there is no evidence based research behind the five love languages. They make sense, they make a lot of sense. People want sometimes to say, well, my love language is eating, right?
Yeah.
Well, eating with whom?
Mhm.
Right? And eating what? Because that's quality time in all actuality, right?
Right. Mhm.
So the overarching perspective makes a lot of sense. Then the other component to the controversy is that it's not culturally sound. So we don't have research that says that we had, 500 couples, 20% of them African American, 15% of them Hispanic, 90%, whatever that looks like. There's
Mhm.
no research behind it. So people really, who are looking for something evidence based will find
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Oh, I understand that. Like it's
Hmm.
when you don't have the demographics and the models to show. But I do think, and this is another compliment to your book, is that you do take these theories or concepts like the five love
Quality
languages
time. Yes, yes.
and attachment theory as well. There's mentions of
Mm,
secure attachment. These are all things I think, and I'm sure you've seen on TikTok and Instagram, that are becoming big therapy speak. People are utilizing them in messaging and information. And I appreciate very much how your book lays those out, you utilizes them, expresses where you've worked with your clients, your
mhm,
patients
mhm.
with these modalities in a way that's accessible
Yeah.
and also in depth, but not so much so that it's like going over your head if you're not, a psychology major or something like that. You make it very accessible.
That's what I really wanted because I feel
Mhm.
like even the way in which I present in associations or in academia or what have you, I want to remove the jargon because I feel like, yes, we have to use it for various reasons. I'm not negating that fact. At the same time, we use it so much and with such emphasis that we kind of take away from what we truly are seeing in our clients, what the client can understand, and how they then can use the techniques and the skills for working through their challenges because they have to remember that it's, created by Bowlsley and Ainsworth and
Mhm.
all these different things. And they have to know the exact name, which sometimes the names kind of shift if you're not careful. One person will, say it's anxious attachment and someone says anxious detached. And yeah, I wanted it to be so plain speak.
Yes. Yeah. That anyone
Hmm.
could pick up the book, read it. And I think that's what I appreciate about it is that, yes, there are controversies around the love languages, there's controversies around attachment style, all of these different things that they're tools to understand human behavior, understand ourselves a little better. And I think that's why it's great also because you incorporate games, you incorporate activities and exercises that are very easy to do, that just
Hmm.
are the jumping off point. And you also create the information around these modalities. Like it doesn't have to be scientific in this context. Yes, there is a place for clinical research, academia, and supporting that, but it is something that people are interested in and people are utilizing and feeling like seen and validated from that standpoint. I think
Hmm.
where it also can get a little dicey, I'm going to say, is that when someone reads it and then they're like, this is me, deal with it. Like, I am this type of person.
Hmm.
I believe that we are flexible beings that are moldable and anything can change just based off of our own will. We have the free will and the ability to do so. And so if you are seeing yourself as this, or also then judging your partner by that criteria, and
Hmm.
that's where it's like, yes, you might prefer acts of kindness or gifts, but all of those things actually feel good. Like none of the
They
love
really
languages.
do.
Yeah. It's just understanding those better so that understanding what you need and also what your partner needs. It's just a
Hmm.
bridge. It's just a little bit of an understanding similar to what you were talking about with touch and sensory. Just understanding one or two things that feel good on your body. Is it cashmere? Is it leather? Is it silk? Is it cotton? Just having a little bit of an understanding, but you don't have to know how cotton is manufactured.
Right.
And does that make sense?
Right. Exactly. That's exactly my point. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think it's important too. And that's why I wrote it from the perspective of mastering Black intimacy for the
Yes.
relationship you've always wanted, is because we in our community, African Americans, have not always had access to an
Mhm.
understanding of what it is to have, attachment disorders or even mental health disorders. Because for one, most of the time we don't believe like, no, we just take it to God, right at the altar, lay it down, He'll take care of it, and therefore we're done. Or we believe in a full healing, which I believe in healing, and I believe in therapy. I believe that God gave doctors wisdom enough to get the education to do what they need to do to help us, right?
Mhm.
But in our culture, we weren't allowed to even read up to a certain point, right?
Right.
And we
Mhm.
think in 2024 that should not have any impact. But intergenerational race based trauma, it has an impact. We weren't allowed to seek medical treatment. And when we did, we were misused and abused. So there's that space where it's not just a matter of, oh, you could catch it on TikTok and then you end up gaining access to information that may be erroneous and not necessarily appropriate for your situation.
Mhm.
But now you have a text that lays out individuals who have had the experience and then how they overcame it so that you can begin the thought process of what do I need to do? Who do I need to talk to in order to maybe see something different because I don't like what I see in my life right now?
Yeah. The relational understanding and it coming from the Black experience. And yet, to your point, that like it is that we're seeing more and more of Black women, mothers, people, pregnant people carrying and not being treated well in the medical field. And
Mhm.
completely like it was just last year there was an artist who had drawn a Black fetus. It's the first time people have seen that, right? Like the
Absolutely.
model. So the medical world, it is so antiquated and so far behind when acknowledging all of the other races, demographics, humans experience outside of what has normally been the standard from a
Yeah.
male perspective. Even that, like women's health has not been prioritized. So there's so much, yeah, it's 2024 and we're all like, what? Why is it still like this? Well, it's still like this because the system has been set up not in our favor, not in
Yes.
women's favor, not in the Black community's favor. So there,
Mhm.
to have text, to have a book that is for Black people, Black couples to work through, but it is informed by psychology, therapy,
Absolutely.
spirituality. I was just listening to someone yesterday and they had said, doctors, therapists, they're the people that are bringing the conditions for healing, but your belief is the healing. Your ability to heal is within you, like the magic, the capabilities are all in your subconscious. They're all your body at work. It's amazing. Like we're a miracle. We're all miracles and we're all healers within ourselves.
Mhm.
The doctors, the all of the external are people trained to know what to do, how to set the conditions for that healing. And there is that level of trust, distrust, the level of leaning too far into faith, belief, it's God's will.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
I know that from my own culture, my own family, generationally,
Mhm.
there is that influence, and there is so much room for that because it's a multi-pronged process of healing and the work that you're doing as a therapist. I believe it's a holistic approach to.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Let's take a quick break. Are you tired of the hormonal roller coaster that comes with birth control pills? 11 years ago, I decided to ditch hormonal birth control and embark on a journey to find a more natural alternative. Over the years, I've used condoms, calendar tracking methods, and withdrawal, which can sometimes be pretty risky and stress inducing practices. However, I've discovered a game changer, Natural Cycles. It's an FDA cleared birth control app that has brought me peace of mind like never before. Whether you're planning or preventing pregnancy, Natural Cycles has got your back. Let's talk about numbers for a moment, even though I hate numbers. Natural Cycles is 98% effective when used properly. And here's the best part, you're not putting any extra hormones into your body. It's all about understanding your cycle and making informed decisions. Ready to start your hormone-free birth control journey? Use the link in our episode description to get 15% off the annual subscription for Natural Cycles. That's right, 15% off to take charge of your reproductive health in a natural and effective way. Say goodbye to those hormonal ups and downs and hello to a birth control approach that aligns with your body. And now back to our episode.
And I think that one of the components that's most important to what we do as therapists is to understand that we're sort of a guide. I don't really tell people what they ought to do, what they should be doing, what they could be doing. I open up some windows for reframing and of understanding and allow them to then take what they know about themselves. Because I believe that honestly, every person who walks through my doors knows the answer.
Mhm.
Sometimes they just
Mhm.
don't want to do it and they need permission,
Mhm.
or they are afraid because what's going to happen when my family doesn't love me anymore? Because we don't even know that that's true, but what if they don't love me anymore? So there's fear in there. There is resentment, but they already know that that's what exists, but they're trying to work through it. How do I move beyond this? Which then looks like forgiveness. And how is that healing? It's all within us. You just sometimes need a guide to give you permission to even think about. what kind of change you make, because therapy is about change.
That leads to my next question. So how do you, with the Black community and what you said about like faith, so is it difficult to get people to come see a therapist? Or as companies,
Sometimes.
it seems that way in your numbers of who you see. I often
Hmm.
find that the women, if it's a heterosexual cisgendered couple, that the wife, the woman, is the one pulling to go to therapy, to see a counselor, to do the work. Something's got to change.
Hmm.
And then layer that on with identity, race, all of that on top of it, of the
Oh my
expectations.
goodness. That's such a complex question.
Right? Yeah. So how do you get people to understand? I mean, yes, you wrote a book and you're, on the platforms and you're talking to people, but how do you get people to unravel some of that belief that this is not
Yeah.
for them?
So I think one of the reasons that it does come easy for me is that I was raised in the church. So my parents were ministers, and
Mm,
I was surrounded by ministers all around me in my family in various capacities. So I have a really good understanding and connection to the Christian word
mhm,
and biblical principles. So oftentimes I'm able to unfold a biblical scripture or a principle in a way that truly connects it to mental health and
mhm.
relationships. I don't know that everyone is able to do that based on belief systems, right?
Right.
Sometimes people come through because they do think that I'm Muslim based on the last name, and I'm
Mhm,
not. And yet they feel that they're able to make a connection because I do have a connection to spirituality.
mhm.
So I
Yeah.
don't advertise as faith based or anything of that nature. But when it shows up in my therapy room, we venture right into it like anything else I would.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's helpful. There are more men seeking to come to therapy than there used to be. I'm
Mhm,
seeing a shift. It's still predominantly women for sure, but I am seeing a shift. And I'm seeing them come alone, the men
mhm.
coming by themselves to say, I know there's something happening. That's tremendous.
Yeah. I do think that there's good and bad sides of social media, but I do think the more that mental health and therapy is spoken about on social media and people are
Hmm.
seeing other people like themselves, like that is a Black man speaking about his mental health. It is setting an example and giving people permission to pursue it for themselves. Like, oh, he's doing this or she's doing that or they are doing this. I want that for me. Or like, and what you were saying
Hmm.
of like, there's that little voice inside of everybody that is there and trying to get out. And what your work is kind of helping unpack all the things around it so you can see it and express it and fully be yourself is
Yeah.
essentially what your work is. And just that moment of recognition on social media or even friends socially, like in person, seeing your
Hmm.
friends. I love that of when people, and I'm sure you have that with your clients, the growth and progress that they make and the influence that it has on their friends. Like when they go to a party and they're like, oh my God, what happened? What changed for you guys? Or and as much as like, yes, buying a new sex toy, doing this thing, spicing it up, incorporating date night, but there is something to, and those are all helpful things, but those are other tools, but there is this need for intimacy to happen,
Hmm.
for like real change, for that like longevity change that people witness and like you might not even feel it in yourself, but they're seeing it expressed. So I'm sure you have a lot of clients where that starts to happen and the word spreads by just visually seeing your friends taking their relationship to a new level or deepening it in a way that wasn't seen before. I love
Yeah.
witnessing that.
Yeah. There's nothing more exciting than that for me. When a client walks in the door and says, I made the following changes, and here's how it's impacting my relationship with my wife, with my husband, with my girlfriend, with my whatever that looks like,
Mhm.
at work, with my boss, whatever that is, and recognizing that they're no longer spiraling in cognitive distortions, that they're no longer letting their anxiety take control. They've learned how to ground themselves or breathe through it. that they now understand what it is to feel abandonment, and they recognize what they can do to ask themselves the questions about, is it real? Is it true? If it is, how do I really feel about it? And what am
Mhm.
I going to do about it? Just learning those skills is transformative. More than anything, though, I have to say, when I have a couple that comes in on the brink of divorce,
Mhm.
it could take a year, whatever, 2 years. I've seen some people for 5. But that moment I see that spark where you see the transition begin to happen, and they make the first comments of, I think I could stay in this if we.
Mhm. Mhm.
Oh, I'm like, okay, we got this.
Yeah. Oof, I have goosebumps of like the allowing vulnerability, the open, like seeing someone crack open a little bit and be like, let's do this, or
That's
I'm willing.
everything.
Mhm.
That's everything. And when it comes from the male perspective, because most people walk in and they think, in a heterosexual couple that, okay, she's going to be on the woman's side.
I was just gonna say that, like, do you have that happen? Because I feel like that is the vibe of, and I have been finding, like, in trying to, find guests for the podcast, a lot of the sex therapists, relationships therapists are often women. And
Mhm.
so it is very easy for, I believe, a man to go into this being like, oh,
Mhm.
obviously she's gonna pick your side. She's gonna agree with
And the
you.
women too. The women
Yeah.
too. They will
Mhm.
literally be like, okay, we're going to Dr. Jeannelle because I heard that she,
Yeah.
and I
Uh-huh.
tell people up front when I do all my introductions, I say, I'm not on your side and I'm not on your side. I'm truly on the side of this relationship and what you want it to look like. That's
Mm.
it.
Yeah.
At the same time, I'm going to tell each of you, if you're tripping, if you, if you're making a mess doing something that makes no sense, if it's asinine, I'm going to say it's asinine. But if
Right.
it's really great and you really got it right, I'm going to tell you that you got it right too.
Yeah. Yeah, you're gonna tell it like it is and not how it feels for you, because it's not about you. But it's also, I
No.
think it's breaking that idea that this isn't, we're going to the judge to decide who's wrong or right. Your
Mhm.
partner isn't your adversary. It's not about winning, because
Oof.
if one of you's
Yeah.
winning, somebody's losing. And what your therapist is, what your role is, Dr. Janelle, is someone who helps the couple realize that this is about both of you are winning. The couple, the relationship is winning. And how do we get to that point versus like make sure that he knows that he didn't do the dishes, or like whatever like argument
Right.
it is. It's not
Right.
about winning the argument. It's about winning in the relationship. And
Yeah.
yeah.
And being able to identify the difference between what it looked like when you were in a space of competition and what it looks like when you're now a part of a team that's
Yeah.
working together. And I have them pull out flip charts and let's write it out. What did you experience when you guys were battling all the time?
Hmm.
How is that different from today? What would you like to make sure is a part of your plan for moving forward? Because there could be some things in the battle that were good, right?
Yeah.
It was
Hmm.
good that she might have been, or he for that matter, might have been firm in, I don't want, I don't know, a third party in our relationship.
Hmm.
That's not what I want. Okay. So how do we get to the place where we keep that from being the topic of conversation without having to check your cell phones all the time and checking people's emails and
Yeah.
all that extra? No.
Yeah.
So I think that when it comes to that understanding of having a male or a female therapist for a couple, you have to find someone who is neutral
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
is just not judging what's happening, recognizing that you're trying to survive, and willing to get the couple to a place of thriving.
Hmm.
And then I'm going to say this. There are also times when it may be a good idea that you go your separate ways. If it's toxic, if there's a lot of trauma that cannot be overcome, if someone's not willing to work and do what needs to be done to change, if the safety doesn't exist, you might
Hmm.
need to go your separate ways. And I
Hmm.
have no difficulty helping people do that as well.
Yeah. I love that too. Of like, that is the option as well. So it's not always with the intention of sticking together. And that's a beautiful thing to help people work through that and really get them to
Mm-hmm.
build the life they want. But sometimes building the life they want requires doing it separately, moving on,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
also supporting them through that transition. The dismantling of a relationship is one of the hardest things we do as human beings. It's like up there with dealing with grief and loss. I believe that the loss of a relationship, a breakup, is really difficult, and it's also difficult for people, especially in codependent relationships. When you were talking about the couples and the competition, I had this visual of like a metaphor of like, you're not playing Jenga with your partner. That's what happens when you're competing. You're pulling out the bricks, the foundation, and it's going to fall. The tower is going to collapse. And you have to start thinking of your relationship as, I'm going to place a piece, you're going to place a piece. This might be a boundary. This is where I'm not comfortable, but it's not to undermine or pull out from the relationship and make it weaker. It's a co collaboration, it's a building of the relationship versus a dismantling, a pulling apart. And so when you were talking about it, I was like, oh, it's kind of like people are playing Jenga with each other and like, how can I
Mm-hmm.
cut you, or this hurts, so I'm going to hurt you, or this doesn't feel good, but I don't know how to tell you, so I'm going to do these things. And you're just pulling out the foundations until it's just a wobbly tower ready to fall and break, versus like thinking of it as building and putting those pieces together, expressing yourself, sharing, co-collaborating with your partner. And I love that you're like, you check in with like, well, how does it feel compared to what it felt like before, and how do we keep continuing to
Mm-hmm.
build and work together. And then you had mentioned the idea that sometimes it is the relationship is just coming to an end, and you're helping people recognize and work through that process and that
Right.
the breakup. We're going to wrap up now, and I appreciate your time and your knowledge and your wisdom. If there is anything that we missed in the conversation, is there anything that you want to add or share with our audience, our listeners?
I think the most important thing is that your mental health is so vital to the success of a relationship. Your emotional health is so vital to the success of a relationship. And it's important to recognize that when you feel yourself struggling, there's nothing wrong with seeking assistance, whether that's reading a book, doing some meditation, or going to your partner and trying to express as gingerly as you can what you're feeling for you, not how they make you feel,
Mm-hmm.
because no one can make you feel a thing.
Mm-hmm.
You choose the feeling you want.
Truly. Yeah. And I think a lot of people don't know that or recognize that. And that's the other part of it, is when people are stuck in the blame game. So it's either I want to be right, you're wrong, or the blame game, you're doing this to me, I feel this way, and you keep
Mhm.
making this happen. Or something my partner had pointed out the other day is like, we never say to one another, you keep doing this. That's never come out. Like, we've been together
Mm.
about a year and a half now, or almost, yeah, almost
Mhm.
2 years. And he noticed that like neither of us ever have that as a part of our interaction of like, oh, this keeps happening, you keep doing this to me, or why do you do this all the time? That has never been a thing for us.
That's fantastic.
He pointed out that, well, actually, whenever there is something, we sit and talk and listen to each other, and usually that thing resolves. So it doesn't become a pattern, it doesn't become a point of frustration for either of us,
Right.
because the both of us communicate and hear each other and express like, oh, this is happening to you, and I just want you to understand that this is how I responded, and fully working through it to the point where it doesn't become a recurring issue, a point of frustration
Mhm.
for either of us. And it was very cool. I was like, oh yeah, we don't do that.
And I think, as you get older, what you'll also do, because I'm in a different phase of my life, I presume, than you. What you'll also find yourself doing is asking yourself how important it is. How important is this conversation? Is this disagreement? Do I really care at that level? Not that you don't care about the person, but
Mm-hmm.
is what they're doing or saying something that truly has the kind of impact that I'm giving it, the weight that I'm giving it? Or am I just already feeling
Mm-hmm.
something in my own, all that's happened throughout the day? And now you say this thing and now I got to go off, right?
Yeah. I'm in that place of like learning to pause and let things sit. And well, should I have a drink of water? Should I eat something before I react to whatever is going on with him? It's checking in with myself like, do I need a
Hmm.
nap first?
Is
Do I
my
need,
sugar low? Do I need an orange?
yeah, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Do I need to nourish myself And would my perspective change? Is the filter that I'm reading this and experiencing
Mhm.
this from that place of
Mhm.
like, I'm tired, I'm cranky, I had a weird interaction at work, whatever those things are that are kind of fueling that feeling. If you pause to remove it, it can offer insight of like, actually, that doesn't really matter. That actually isn't a thing that doesn't have to lead to a bigger problem issue. I think once you start to, like you were saying, like tune in and really know yourself, you'll start to know the real issues, the things that you need to advocate for yourself, the things that you need to speak about. And oftentimes your partner, if you are starting to be in sync, will feel that
Oh,
too.
yeah.
And you both have a perspective and you're like, oh, actually, yeah, I was feeling that too. This wasn't feeling right. And
I'll give you a great
yeah.
example of that, and then I know we'll go. So my partner and I, we've been together now 2 years, so just a little bit longer than you guys.
Hmm.
And one day I called him. He didn't answer. That's not a big deal for me. We're both very busy people. It happened to actually be a Sunday. So I knew he was, my church service had gotten out well before his. So when he called me back, he says, I left my phone at home, but I knew we both have grown children. So he said, I knew where my kids were and their mother would be there if they needed help with something.
Hmm.
I paused and just got quiet. Okay. And then he was sort of like, wait a minute, why'd you get quiet? I said, no reason. I'm good. So he comes by and he says, I now know why you got quiet. And I said, oh, he says, you probably heard me saying that I didn't need to have the phone for you and for your call. So your level of importance was not as high as the others. And I said, well, that's an interesting thought.
Hmm.
Would you like to talk about it? He says, I just want you to know that that's not true. But he had the opportunity to work through that, right? I didn't need to bring it to his attention. I didn't need to have a fit and say, how come you don't see me as being as important?
Hmm.
Those are his kids. That's his ex-wife. I get that, right?
Hmm.
At the same time, I really in my heart know that I'm important to him.
Yeah.
So my quiet was sort of like, well, let me let that sit so he can hear himself
Hmm.
rather than me having to hear for him.
Yeah. Which is a really beautiful place to be in with your partner of that his self-awareness allowed him to realize, and the space you were giving him to realize, oh, this is how it could land with her, right? It's like, how does this land with my partner? When you can get to that place of understanding and then work from it. So it doesn't have to be a fight. You don't have to advocate. And the foundation of your relationship is not built on a priority scale.
Right.
But that is how that could land, and it is maybe
Mm-hmm.
how the initial like, that feels funny,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and not being like, oh, I'm never going to tell him, wait till like I'm going to that's not what
Oh
you're doing
no.
either. You're not like, oh, I'm going to keep this in and this is the reality of it, and then keep building that narrative of like insecurity or feeling that deprioritized in a way,
Oh yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
instead just sitting with it, seeing how you feel, but allowing your partner the space to catch up or see it is a really
Yes.
incredible
Catch
thing.
up is a good word.
Hmm.
It's a really good because women are quick. And
Yes.
I'm not saying men are slow.
Hmm.
That's not what I'm saying.
Hmm.
But women are really quick with their connection to an emotion without really knowing that it's coming, right?
Yes. Yep. Hmm.
So yeah, that catch up's important. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking.
No, no, no. It's great. I appreciate that story. That is a really important story because I think a lot of people, that is one of those places in a relationship that like should be celebrated and shared. And it's not
Hmm.
always about the battles and overcoming the battles, but it's allowing the space where a battle doesn't even have to happen and that you
Nope.
can communicate. It's the biggest thing of all relationship dynamics, whether it's parental, familial, work colleagues, or your intimate partner, your sexual partner. All of those relationships require a certain level of communication. And when you get to that place, it's so important to
Hmm.
share those stories as the example as well, because I think people see a lot of the bad sides of it, the fights, the blowups. I tell my friends, I'm trying to get my friends to stop watching some reality television because I'm like, the influence of those arguments and the cat fights and the this and that is actually, you're absorbing that, and it's very easy to quickly start reflecting that in your life and being like, the drama,
Absolutely.
like dun dun dun, what is she going to do next, that
Well,
kind of
there's an
energy.
addiction to drama, just
Yes.
like there's an addiction to alcohol or
Yeah.
marijuana or
Hmm.
heroin or what. There is an addiction to drama, and you have to really work through. the
Right.
withdrawals that you have to get out of that.
Yeah. And making the
People don't
choice.
realize that.
Yep. And choosing not to frame it from a place of drama and needing that heightened energy, and
Mhm.
allowing yourself to interact with people in a way that is calm and sitting back and responding and taking the time. And I love that, like allowing people in your life, partners, to catch up and see where the things landed versus being like, I have to scream every time so you hear me, and that
Mhm.
I'm the
Mhm.
priority, I'm the number one.
Mm.
You don't have to do that, and you can allow
Yeah.
this space.
There's no list.
Yes, yeah, there is no list, and but I love that he recognized that and then
Mhm.
acknowledged it, because that's what's important, and
Absolutely.
more people need to hear those kinds of stories. I encourage my girlfriends, like, I don't want you to just call me to complain about your partner or how they didn't do this or
Mhm.
whatever. I'm here for that. I'm here to support you and see that. But also please share when like your partner does the sweetest, littlest things. And I encourage, like I try to do that for myself too, of like sharing those little moments where my partner validates me, makes me feel seen, makes me feel
Right.
special, those
Right.
acts of love. When your
Yes.
partners do that, share it with people, because I think that
Mhm.
spreading that information versus kind of venting about your partner, the energy will shift as well. Like how you're
Absolutely.
expressing and sharing your partner. If you're always going back behind and calling your mother and telling her he's doing this, they're doing that, they're not.
And your mom's gonna be stuck there. When
Yes.
you've moved on, she's gonna be stuck there
Hmm.
believing he's the bad person or she's the bad person and look how terrible, and treating them in that way. And now you've created a rift in yet another relationship and you've moved on and forgiven them.
Yep. And you're working through it. But then when you're like, wait, well, stop judging him that way, or stop judging her that way, or don't, why are you so angry with them? It's like, well, because you built up the narrative. The storyline has been this. And just because you're working
Mhm.
and shifting here behind closed doors, it's hard for the other person who's receiving that. So I do think it's important to share the wins and the like not wins and losses, but the highs and
Mhm.
the lows of the relationship, and kind
Mhm.
of recognizing in ourselves that we can easily start to dump the bad sides of our relationship
Yeah.
on our circle of friends and family, and then be shocked when they're like exactly what you said, when your mother's like, well, he's a jerk, right? Like, are we on that team? Am I supposed to
Right,
be on this
right,
team, or how do I
right.
feel? Yeah. So I've enjoyed this conversation. We can keep going about relationship
We
dynamics
could.
forever and ever, and I appreciate your time, Dr. Jeannelle. I'm so glad we got to catch up again and connect since January. Thank you so
Mhm.
much. How can people find you, find the book, work with you?
Mhm. So drjeannelle.com. It's DRJEANNELLE.com. The book can be found on the website as well. I am on Instagram at Dr. Jeannelle, and then on TikTok at dr.jeannelle, LMFT. And I think that's it.
Okay.
And then, yes, I have a host of staff too who
Yes.
are seeing clients.
Mhm.
So you can always make an appointment, go to the website, call the 843-872-6411, and my assistant Tracy will make sure everybody gets seen.
Oh, amazing. And do you work with people? This is a good question. Do you work with people on Zoom, in person, only in your state?
Both.
Yeah. Okay, great.
I'm licensed in South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina.
Hmm.
But we now have a host of states that have reciprocity.
Okay.
So, because there's such a shortage of mental health clinicians,
Hmm.
there's a great deal of associations working on that reciprocity. So, it really just depends on where they are. But I do both telehealth and in the office.
Amazing. Awesome. Thank you
Mhm.
so much. Thank you for your time. I appreciate your wisdom and your sharing and your generosity of your storytelling. I hope you have a
Thank
great
you.
day.
You too.
Thank you
Take
so
care.
much. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Special thanks to all of our guests. Head South is hosted by Kat Meyer, produced by Isis Barlow, edited by Megan Hook, with music by Lily Rezi Rothman, graphics by Ella Chodos Irvine, cover art by Gina Ship Casey, and intro by Murph Meyer.
If you're looking for me, I